I'm going to give it to Monika, but I'd like to introduce her. So Monika has been an iOS developer for over 8 years and currently works as a senior staff engineer at ChargePoint. Oh, okay, so I was just going to introduce all right, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. All right. Today's session was, a lot of it was going to be just introducing ourselves and kind of going through like what the structure of this, kind of a group study will be. Actually, one question that we needed to figure out for the organization is that, we're using this book. So basically it's a book written, let me just bring it to the, so, this asynchronous programming with SwiftUI and Combine. And Peter Friese actually works for Google for Firebase. So, I've been reading some of his blogs and, explanations for various, a lot of things about SwiftUI and some asynchronous stuff. So when I saw that he had a book, I got all excited because he seems like he's good at, he speaks very clearly, writes very clearly, and gives good examples. So seemed like a good book to get started, because sometimes, it gets way too technical and complicated right away, and you can get kind of a little discouraged going through this. In the book, and I don't know how many of you have the book, but obviously, you would need it to continue with the session. I have the digital book, but you can have the print book too. It doesn't really matter. He spends the first part of the book on SwiftUI because he's assuming that maybe the reader doesn't have that much experience. It's kind of like a condensed sort of summary of SwiftUI. And, we'll go a little over the first 3 chapters, but given that I saw that there are some folks that are just kind of trying to learn about iOS and whatever, maybe then, the first 2 sessions, the first one, chapter 1 and 2 and 3 is kind of what I was thinking we're going to kind of go through, and then the next session would be the next 3 chapters, and then we can kind of dig to the rest of the parts where it starts introducing Combine, and then and part 3 is async and await. And part of all this is really getting comfortable with reactive programming, which for some of us, where we come from UIKit and more traditional iOS programming, it is a new way of thinking and doing things that actually sometimes feels a little painful because you're sort of used to the imperative way of doing things. And with SwiftUI, I think Apple, that was their major foray into reactive programming because, it just built that way. And of course, so in some ways, actually, if you haven't had experience with UI kits and with how iOS programming was before, you're kind of in an advantage because then you kind of start afresh and don't have to be, sort of contaminated with what we've done before. I guess one question I have is, we have to kind of decide how frequently we want to meet. Ideally to have this cadence and make sure that we're kind of just, going along. It would be nice to meet weekly, just Fridays, but I didn't know like how comfortable folks are with doing that. Would they prefer every 2 weeks or every week is okay? Now it's totally okay to like miss a week, or, if you get busy at work, like, because the point is also you have the book, so you can kind of catch up to it, or, at some point just come in, for that session and just see what people are talking. So it's not, it's not imperative that you show up every week. But given that it's also, we don't want this to go on like for a whole year, like, it would be nice to do it weekly so that then maybe we could like do 1 or 2 chapters a week. So we have enough time to just kind of go through everything. And ideally, it would be nice, like, we decide on what chapters we're covering in every session, and then you could just read up on it if you could. And then during the session, we kind of go over, any questions folks had, any blockers, if there are exercises, some of them do, we can go through the exercises together. So it's kind of a way to sort of like, learn together, based on this book. So I guess, I don't know what's the best way to like, are folks comfortable doing this weekly? I'll check on to see. Yeah. How do people feel? Oh,
Okay, so I've created a poll to make it
great.
easier.
Navati, you're great. Okay, yes. So let's see. This is great, like real-time polling. Perfect. Let's see. So we have okay. All right, so we have 70% say weekly, 30% say bi-weekly. So I guess for majority we'll go with weekly, but honestly, don't feel bad if you can commit every 2 weeks, that's fine too. It's the whole point of this is just to get you learning, and whatever you can commit, that's already great. So and all the other thing is these sessions will be recorded. So if you can't make it every week, you could just watch and fast forward really quickly, which is like do a very condensed way of going through this. So I guess we'll meet weekly, and what we would do is like for the upcoming week, we'll put it on Slack of what chapters we're covering, so you have time to sort of like if you have time to initially kind of read through and do some of the exercises, and then we'll meet and kind of go over those chapters. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good. We could also probably create a poll for how many chapters we want to do for the next session at the end of the session or closer to the ending.
Yeah, and from what I was like looking at the book, sometimes you can, like right now with the whole SwiftUI intro, we can go a little faster, possibly. I mean, we were thinking that it would be the first 3 chapters today, but I'll go through that, but we'll still next week kind of try to finish up the SwiftUI portion, so like do chapter 4, 5, and 6 next week. But as we get into the combine and the other stuff, then we can kind of slow it down to a chapter a week, if it makes sense, depending on how short or long those chapters are. So it can vary per week. And so it looked like from what everybody was talking that, let me just this. And
yeah, we also had a similar question about how many chapters we'd cover next time. So yeah, we can decide that maybe at the end of each session.
Yes,
because some of them might get heavier.
Exactly. Some will, so basically, for the book, Peter decides that, it makes sense to just give you an overview of what SwiftUI is, which is nice, so that, you kind of have, in case, you're rusty or you haven't even looked at it. So it's kind of it kind of encompasses that information in there too. So there's the getting started with SwiftUI, which actually I should start with the first one is like, and he's actually using, there's another part to this too, that if you want to follow along, there is a GitHub for doing this. So let me just see, where does he mention? So I have, there we go. So this is the GitHub of the his code, and I strongly recommend that you download the code, because it's nice to kind of follow along as he's kind of going through the various code examples. So I downloaded it, and chapter 1 was basically just like the hello world of SwiftUI, that when you go in, he walks you through how to create a project. And this book, because it's so new, it actually uses or references Xcode 14, which is pretty recent version of Xcode, which is nice, because some books, if they're kind of older, then there's some discrepancy between whether the code actually runs or not on the latest Xcode. But this one's pretty recent. And then the other thing, we actually have a GitHub for Women Who Code that we'll also share with you. So if there are exercises, we do push those, at least my version, but it would be nice if you guys have your version too, that you can fork it and have your version in there too, because interestingly, for the exercises in his GitHub, he doesn't have the solutions for it. So far, you kind of can see if it works or not based on what it's what's asking you to do, but sometimes you may also be unsure. So that's another reason for us to get together and make sure that we all feel like we understood what the exercise was asking to do. So one question, actually, another question I have: how many of you actually have the book and have looked through these first 3 chapters? Because if folks are just beginning to read, we could really have a reset and have everyone read the first 3 chapters and do that next Friday. So, just want to make sure. So I'll look at chat. So how many of you have actually gone through, have the book and, okay, so Mayley says she doesn't have to go, just got to chapter 2. Okay. Anyone else? Julian, I have to skim through to complete it, but we'll probably read more in depth. Okay. Others? I need to read more in detail. Okay. Don't have the book yet, but ordered. Great. I don't have the book yet. Okay. I saw Navati, so I will have to. Okay. So it looks like maybe this is good. So basically, this is this session we kind of used to get to know each other and sort of go through how our approach is. But it looks like as you guys are getting the book, we really could sort of make sure that everyone for the next session has gone through the first 3 chapters. And basically, the first part is kind of getting to know SwiftUI, and never hurts to, even if you've done it, to sort of kind of read again. And, sometimes you learn new things with it too. So we can kind of plan to at least, and actually this chapter 3, where he kind of goes through views and view modifiers, it was nice for me to kind of remember all that too. So we can basically next Friday, get together, kind of go through what, as we're sort of like looking at SwiftUI, are there any sort of things that, we had questions about the chapters? I can kind of go through my summary of like some of the things that I found interesting to learn. And he also talks about like, how you can add, in different ways of kind of adding the UI to the code. So that would be really cool. And then we can kind of go through the exercises. There's a couple. So we can do that. And then basically, and have that, so instead of doing all 6 chapters, which seems kind of overwhelming, dividing into like the next week, half of it, and then the week after we can decide, once we're kind of doing, how many other chapters we want to tackle for the week after. But, the way the book is sort of organized is that he does, which I really like, is that he does kind of go, it's a little project based. So, he starts with a very simple project in chapter 2, where, you're going to just show a list of books, and he's kind of going over concepts in SwiftUI while we're kind of building this simple app. And he has a starter project in his GitHub, and that's why it's good to just download that and start with the starter, which has like the images and all that things that you need. And what I kind of been doing is sort of following along in the book, and then sort of typing in as he's doing it and explaining, and just making sure that it's all working. But at the same time, he also has a final project, which a lot of these books do, that has all the code. So in case you get stuck, you can kind of look at how it was supposed to be, because sometimes, you just kind of mess up and you're like, oh, it's supposed to show, but this preview is like showing broken, and, so then you can kind of correct yourself. But, you kind of go through this, basically this first project is like displaying a list of books, and he kind of shows you how to make the list work, and there's different concepts for like container views, and how we compose these views together, and how we bind the data, which are these list of books and book information, to the UI, which is part of that, and how you can kind of modify the canvas to see these different, variants, like, dark mode, light mode. And then here he just kind of gives a couple of very simple exercises to add, so that, you kind of know if you understood the previous previous concepts. And then basically the chapter 3 is just kind of going over views and view modifiers. And this one is kind of more like just less, it's not, you don't work on the project, but it's more, concepts. And a summary at the end of that. So I have got, like, I kind of finished the first 6 because I wanted to be a little ahead, but there is certain things that is nice, state management is a big one, which we're going to get into. So there's things that it would be nice to go over anyhow. So how do folks feel about this? So does it seem like a good plan for us for next Friday to tackle these, first 3 chapters? Does that sound good?
Do you want me to create a poll?
Yeah, sure. Don't be shy. We can also do less or more. Yeah. And it's funny because I've got a bunch of books. Are we meeting at the same time? Yes. And does this time work out for everyone? Because for me, Fridays in general are the best day because, usually the other days I'm not always sure that some meeting or something kind of gets inserted there. But Fridays seem a little calmer, especially, and then we picked 8:30 a.m. PST to make sure that, if you're on the East Coast, it's kind of lining up with lunchtime, so you might be freer there. Now, what is the time right now in Mexico? I actually hadn't considered that, if this is a reasonable time.
Montreal's 1 hour before us, right? I think it's 11ish there. Let me know.
Okay,
Yes,
so it's 11. Okay, so it's kind of similar to East Coast, right? Yeah, so finding a perfect time is really, really hard. So there's never, but hopefully this time works for everyone. And and again, if 1 week, suddenly you have a meeting or something comes up, really don't worry about it, because we're going to record this. You also have the book, so you can read it on your own. So, this is not supposed to make things stressful, but at the same time, it's sort of giving you a way to sort of like make a pact with yourself that, okay, I'm going to try to see if I could finish this book. And now I have these other folks that I can, do this with, which always helps, because sometimes it's kind of lonely if you're just doing it by yourself all the time. Okay, so we have a poll. Let's see. This is so cool. I like this real time. Yeah. Okay. So it seems like the majority is okay with chapters 1 to 3. And if at some point we'll, this is kind of where we're starting, but we can always change things around. And also, Navati, is it possible to have a Slack channel just for this study group, or?
Yeah, definitely. We can do that.
Yeah, so if we do that, that would be nice too, because as you're reading this week, and obviously we're going to discuss, but if there's questions or things, we can kind of use that channel to sort of talk through something, especially as we get further along in the book, so that it's kind of more interactive than just waiting for Friday. So I think the things to do for next week is, make sure you have the book, download the GitHub code, especially for those 3 chapters that we're going to cover, and, attempt the exercises. So that's sort of our to-do for next week. And then we will meet, and I'll create a little presentation of things that I sort of learned from that. But if others have also want to highlight what was kind of interesting for them, questions like things that doesn't make sense, or things that they thought, oh, this is really cool, I didn't know you could do this, with SwiftUI, or I learned this, that would be nice to share too. So we kind of make it more interactive that way. And then we'll go through the exercise, and have folks kind of share how they did it, and, again, make it interactive. Does that sound good for everyone?
Sounds great.
A thumbs up. I can. Yeah, great. So we can, oh. Yeah. And again, consider this as like group study. I always remember in college, it was always better when you worked in a group and tackled hard stuff. It was always too lonely when you sit by yourself in the library and did it. So this is kind of, we're all kind of want to learn together. Okay, so we can kind of end a little early today, unless anyone else has questions or anything that they want to go over before we end this.
So I'll stop recording.
Okay.